You know when they say never meet your heroes? They're wrong.
Hello, Frank Smith.
Yeah, Dr. Smith, it's Ben MacConnell.
Yeah, hey Ben, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you doing? Is,
Are we gonna do it on this line?
is that okay? Would you like me to call you on a
Sure.
landline?
Yeah. No, it's fine with me. No,
Okay.
we don't even have a landline.
Yep, it's 2024, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
I want you to meet Frank Smith, an authentic American hero, cut from the deep history of organizing people into a force for good. My interview with him will take us back to a time when registering African Americans to vote could get you killed, a place called Marshall County, Mississippi in 1962. Organizers like Frank faced police harassment during the day and Klan reprisals by night. Instead of running away, Frank and his friends dropped out of college and ran toward the struggle. His life and the stories he shares in this interview need no additional commentary, really. So I'll stay out of the way. But humbly, I just want to say this at the beginning. My fellow organizers and I have not and will likely never face the level of physical and mental intimidation that Frank and his fellow organizers endured. And yet, I often find myself yearning for the labor to be less trying, to come just a little bit easier. My takeaway from talking with Frank is I actually had it all backwards. It's not the labor that must get lighter. It's the steely resolve that he possessed that we should be praying for. Thanks, Frank. Welcome to the Underdogs United podcast, the podcast series dedicated to anyone curious about or deeply committed to organizing people into a force for good. Who knows? This could be your life's calling. I'm your host, Ben MacConnell. So for the people listening that have no idea what SNCC is, tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so the student SNCC, first of all, the letters stand for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And it's a good description of how we started out. We were all students based in mostly historically Black college campuses, each of which started their own demonstrations in the local community where the school is located. So I was in Atlanta at Morehouse College, and we started City Movement in Atlanta. And then I later, when we formed SNCC, which was a federation of these campus organizations, which is what SNCC was, SNCC then for the first time in '62 developed a program where we would ask people to drop out of school, essentially to pause their education and go live in these communities to try to register people to vote. And some of that was due to the fact that we would go in and spend a few days in some communities, let's say over the Easter holidays, and then when we left, the local people would be punished by the white Klan people, let's put it that way, would be punished for coordinating with us, cooperating with us, for marching with us, picketing. And so in the meantime, we'd be back on our campus wherever we were, safe in safety. And so we decided we couldn't no longer expose people to that kind of danger and then leave them.
Yeah.
So we've become an organization where our number one objective is to get people to go live in these neighborhoods, to embed themselves in the local neighborhood and organize them. And it was a tremendous success. So it's but that's one of the first. That's sort of how it got started. That's a sort of thumbnail of how it got. It's really how it got its beginning and how it really gained footing as a civil rights group.
And so, just in the beginning, it was kind of a disparate set of student organizations, and then the voting registration campaign became a national that drew from all over the country. Is that about right, or?
Yeah, and let me say, I mentioned one other thing. In the beginning, it's a sit-in movement that's based on that's going to these restaurants and drugstores and various places where they had lunch counters.
Mm-hmm.
And those lunch counters were an outward symbol of discrimination, of a much deeper, profound discrimination process that was in the laws of these states, and really was in the Constitution of the United States until the 64 Civil Rights Act was passed, 1964 Civil Rights Act. So we're talking 1962 here now. So we're 2 years before the Civil Rights Act is passed. So that's what SNCC was doing, and that became sort of the symbol of the movement, integration. At the lunch counter, and Dr. King had started this group back in Montgomery, Alabama, around integration on the buses. Remember that the Montgomery movement starts because Rosa Parks is sitting in a seat on a bus, and some white person get on there and tell her she got to move further back toward the back, because only white people sit in the front part of the bus. Black people had to sit in the back part of the bus. So part of that movement had to do with integration. Well, SNCC transitions from integration, lunch counter integration, to voter registration, to trying to get people registered to vote. Primarily because in these what we call black belt counties, these counties are called black belt because of the soil. But that fertile soil that's black is also soil where African Americans end up as slaves when they're brought to this country in the beginning. And so by the time we get to the 1960s civil rights movement, they're still living in those states, those what we call black belt states. They also are called black belt because in many of these cases, the black population outnumbers the white population. And when I went to Holly Springs, Mississippi, to Marshall County, Mississippi in 1962, Marshall County was 76% black. And that's why they wouldn't let any black people register to vote, because they know that. So it says 76% black. That means that the 34% white community was ruling over these black people in a so-called democratic society. There was a lot of resistance, a lot of violence to letting these people register to vote, because they knew that once black people got registered to vote, there would be more equality and more democracy and more cooperation in this county. And so we were, right from the beginning, in a fight with those people who wanted to maintain the status quo. Yeah. And
once they got registered, did you see a shift in power?
Absolutely. I was in Marshall County, Mississippi. The largest town in Marshall County is Holly Springs, Mississippi. The mayor of Holly Springs has had a black mayor now for the last 30, 40 years.
Really?
Since after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed the poll tax and the literacy test. But more importantly, they sent federal registrars into Mississippi to register black people to vote. And those people that they targeted, when the federal registrars came into Marshall County, they targeted a list of people that we had already worked with over the years, trying to help them figure out how to pass what was called the literacy test that you had to take to get registered to vote. It was a literacy test that black people had to take. White people didn't have to take it. White people were grandfathered in. Yeah. Illiterate white people would be allowed to vote. Illiterate white people would be allowed to vote. They wouldn't even have to take the test. They knew they would fail if they took it. So they didn't have to, they exempted them. They exempted them because their grandfathers had voted. And so because black people's grandfathers had not voted, we couldn't be grandfathered in. So the process was just stacked from the beginning. Yeah. And we were challenging that in every way we could.
Yeah, I read your field notes in preparation for this interview, and I a lot of times you're reporting on how many tests were taken down at the poll station. So that was, it's almost unfathomable to think about that in your lifetime, to think that black people needed to take a test in order to vote. It's insane.
Right. And actually just to contrast that even more, I remember we got, we were all summoned from our various locations, me from Holly Springs, Mississippi, to Greenwood, Mississippi, when one of our people got shot in the spring of 1963. It was
Jimmy
February.
Travis?
Jimmy Travis gets shot, yes. Yeah. And so they bring everybody to as part of our demonstrations going on there in Greenwood, we get arrested. They arrest about 400 or 500 people they let all the local people go home, but they kept the civil rights workers in jail. Bob Moses, myself, Lauren, and about 12 of us in the jail. We eventually ended up in federal court in Greenville, Mississippi. And the judge asked Bob Moses, who was our leader, do you really want all of these, do you really think all of these illiterate black people ought to be allowed to vote? Bob said, well, first of all, you got a bunch of illiterate white people who've been voting all these years, and nobody ever said anything about that. And then he said, secondly, in a profound way, he said, Mississippi can't have it both ways. They can't tell black people that they got to be literate and educated to vote, and then not provide them with education. So you can't have it both ways. You can't tell them, you can't lock them out of the schools and put them in the inferior programs, and then tell them that they can't be full citizens until they can vote.
Yeah.
So it can't have it both ways.
Robert Moses kept popping up. He sounds like he was quite the organizer.
Yeah, he was a brilliant man. Absolutely brilliant, brave, brilliant, tough.
Yeah.
And he was the Mississippi had the class of the SNCC organizers. I mean, I take this quote from a book written by all female staff from SNCC called Hands on the Freedom Plow. And one of the writers and one of the, she was actually stationed in Alabama. She said, but she did say, make no mistake about it, the class of the SNCC organizers were in Mississippi. Now, some of that is based on the fact that Mississippi had a reputation for being the most violent and the most scary place, probably in America, for black people. And so you had people like me who were going in there. They coined a phrase now after that we were going into danger instead of running away from danger. We're going into danger, yes. But the guy who was the spiritual leader and the emotional leader and the mastermind of the organization there in Mississippi was Bob Moses, who actually was born in New York City, by the way.
Yeah.
And came to Mississippi when he was an adult, full adult. He was older than we were, but we accepted him because he was on the ground, on the scene, and he was bravest person I've ever met.
Yeah. We're talking about you were with SNCC from 1962 to 1968, and you're 19, 20 years old. How old are you?
Well, in 1962, when I went to Mississippi, I was born in 42, so I would have been 20.
Okay.
20 years old, and I stayed there until I was 26. I moved to Washington, D.C. So, it was what would have been college and graduate school for an average American person now, which meant I had put my education on hold. I ended up later on, by 82, when I get my PhD, I'm the oldest person in my class. So, and my wife went to medical school. She was a senior citizen of her class. So we sacrificed our young years for a higher cause.
What made Frank Smith at 20 answer the call to go to Mississippi? Well,
it's something that I think about a lot in my old age. But I will tell you that my first memory of anything related to this was when I was in 8th grade, when I looked at a Jet magazine that had that story in there that had the picture of Emmett Till and his mutilated body.
This is the muddy backwoods Tallahatchie River, where a weighted body was found, alleged to be that of young Emmett Till.
With a big fan tied around his waist, so he wouldn't surface. He eventually did surface, but I saw that when I was in the 8th grade. I was probably 12 or 14 years old. So that was my first conscious moment. But by the time I got to college in 1959, the civil rights movement starts in earnest in 1960. So it's the end of my freshman year, the first time I marched and picket go to jail when I'm a student at Morehouse College. And it was in the air. It was everywhere, everybody. And I did determine at a very early age that I was not going to allow somebody else to do more for my freedom than I did myself. So that sort of put me on a trajectory at college where I was demonstrating in Atlanta. And then when SNCC, Bob Moses actually came to Atlanta, personally recruited me and asked me to come to Mississippi with him. So I had a particular attachment to him. So he, that was it. And I actually found my calling, my group. We're still, my best friends today are people who were with me in the civil rights movement. My first wife, Jean, who's the mother of my two children, she and I met at SNCC, got married, and eventually stayed in Mississippi together, and then came to Washington together, so she could go to medical school here at Howard. So it set my life on a certain trajectory, which it continues today. I mean, the exhibit here at the African American Civil War Museum is called Civil War to Civil Rights. And it's a story of Black people fight for freedom here in the United States. And it starts historically with the Civil War, which is a good place to start it. And then we transition to the Civil Rights Movement and then talk about the future from the last part of our exhibit.
I see. So not that it has to be magical, but describe a little bit getting recruited by Bob Moses at Morehouse. What was that encounter?
Well, some of it was that I had by the time become disillusioned with the Atlanta movement. In the first place, we had the best boycott, and we're trying to integrate lunch counters in Atlanta. We would picket those places, and eventually started a boycott.
Okay,
and it was my job. I was the campus organizer who probably did most of the organizing in the community around Atlanta. So we eventually convinced people not to shop in those stores. The stores didn't care that much that students didn't shop there. Students don't ever have any money anyway. And nobody really cared that much about us, whether we came in there or not. But our presence there would disturb the customers who are already in the place. Yeah. And it was a consciousness raising program to try to make these people realize that Black people were being treated badly. And some of them didn't care about that, but there were some whites who cared about it. Yeah. First of all, and then secondly, we coupled that with a boycott, where we asked people not to shop there, and so African Americans, we really brought that Rich's department store to its knees, really, and then at some point or another, Martin Luther King Sr. and the downtown Black business people got involved with the white business people. They came with some kind of what they call a settlement, which was not really a settlement. It was a sellout. It was not a settlement. And I guess they thought we didn't know the difference since we were college students, but we knew the difference between a sellout and a settlement. Yeah. So I had become so disillusioned with that. And that's how Bob heard about me. He said, look, you know what? There's never going to be a real movement in Atlanta. You got all these old people here who run the place. And they still run it to today, by the way. Is
that right?
Mostly. Yeah, but which is one of the reasons why I didn't go back to Atlanta. I was invited back by many people there, including some of these older, business people who they realized later that we could have gotten a lot more out of that agreement if we had held out. That they sold out too quickly, so they got little or nothing out of it. It took 10 years to integrate after we had that settlement, which is ridiculous. Yeah. So by then I was fed up with that. Bob heard about it. That's why he came talk to me about it. It's about, now I never thought about going to Mississippi. But let me just add one other thing. I was born in Newnan, Georgia, just south of Atlanta, and I grew up on a plantation. I was one of the few people in SNCC who came from outside that actually picked cotton and chopped cotton, and I picked peaches and tobacco, not tobacco, but I came out of a farm background, and I knew something about what it took to motivate people in the farming community, and so I had a combination of college, I then spent time in Atlanta, in the city of Atlanta, and but in Mississippi we were assigned to these rural areas. I went to Holly Springs, which was 76% Black. It was cotton. It was all the fields were cotton fields. Now they got some other stuff there. I was there a few weeks ago in May actually to speak to a class there, graduating class at West College. Wow. But in those days it was all cotton. Cotton was king. and there were black farmers who owned land there. As a matter of fact, I first heard about these black soldiers in the Civil War from a man named Mr. Reeves, Henry Reeves, who was a farmer. He one of those people got 40 acres in that 40-acre mule thing. By the time I got there, he had more than 40 acres. He had about 200 acres, so he was a big farmer for black people. And but he also was an NAACP organizer, was trying to register people to vote. And so he heard I was in. He lived in the next county over in Benton County. He heard there was a freedom rider who had located in Holly Springs in Marshall County, and he came to see if I would add his county to my list of places where I worked, as if I didn't have enough to do already. So he came over there, and I got interested in working with him. He had his grandfather's rifle in his uniform. He was the one that told me about these soldiers.
Wow.
So I got interested then, and it stayed in my mind, I guess, in my heart. So years later, I'd be in Washington, D.C., trying to figure out how to rebuild this historic black community called Black Broadway. Came up with the idea of putting up a monument to these soldiers. And now that monument is recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the monument with more names than any other monument in the world. So
wow,
it's been a real process. But you know, the reality in life is that we learn as we go. We should take what we learn and use it. You don't learn it and just get rid of it. You learn it and tuck it back somewhere in your mind, so one day you'll be able to call upon it again to use it when the circumstances are right.
Yeah.
And so that's the second lesson I teach to people. The first one is that you can win these rights, as they did during the Civil War and that period afterwards with these 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. And you can win these rights. And in Marshall County, right after the Civil War, Marshall County had a black mayor. In Holly Springs, they had a black sheriff for a few years. And then the Klan gets and the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Council and they run all these people out of office. And so they don't regain those rights until we come in the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s and eventually get the Voting Rights Bill passed. I mean, the Voting Rights Bill really is the one that changes the place.
Got it.
Because much counter integration by itself in Marshall County was not going to change the place. What changed it was taking the trappings of power, the sheriff and the mayor and the police chief, taking those people out of office and putting in some more caring people. And in some cases, those people didn't have to be black. They were white people who knew that they had to cater to these black registered voters in order for them to be able to get reelected. So, and if they did something stupid while they were in office, and the next time around some black people got elected, they might still get arrested for having violated the law 5 or 6 years ago. So it changed the whole trajectory of Mississippi.
It's all about power, isn't it?
It's all about power, who has access to it, and how you build coalitions.
Yeah.
So you can make it work for everybody.
And that's just as, I mean, in doing this podcast and looking at every positive thing that's happened under a democracy, it seems like it always comes back down to power.
Yeah, and it comes down to power, but it also comes down to those fundamental items that are in the Constitution of the United States. I think that when people talk about this country as an experiment, as a magical experiment in the world, it's based on the notion that all people, what makes us equal is our vote counts equal. If you're a billionaire, you only get one vote. If you're Frank Smith, you get one vote. Yeah. So technically, that makes us all equal. Now, the billionaire with his money can maybe go out and buy himself a few extra votes.
Yeah, sure can.
But if I get busy, I might go out there and find a few extra votes too for somebody who cares about the same items, the same issues I care about, and we might still win.
And we call that organizing.
We call it organizing, absolutely. And then the most important thing is that threat of danger that I talked about earlier. What made Mississippi and rural Georgia and Alabama a horrible place to live was the threat that the law faced, that you faced the local cop if you try to sit in and try to get your rights. And then at that night, you faced the Ku Klux Klan. which is what happened to Emmett Till. They show up at your house, drag you out of your house. In some cases, they burn the house down and stuff. So just the abject violence and threat of violence was so thick and palpable that that anybody with had a little bit of sense and two nickels to rub together got the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Because it was just a tough place to live and to grow up. And people ought to be able to live and grow up where they want to. People ought to be people who have worked the Mississippi Delta, who cleared those fields and built those factories and those mines and those tobacco fields, ought to be able to stay there if they want to stay, and they ought to be able to make a living for themselves and their families, and they ought to be able to live without fear and without intimidation. And so they have a right. They have a right to be there. It's their area, it's their country, it's their community. And I was back there this year in May, as I told you. It was really amazing to me to see that a number of the young people who are in office there now, people who are second and third generation, they were born in Mississippi. They went away to college in some cases, came back, went away to graduate school, law school, came back, and now they're the ones who are mayors of these little towns and sheriffs, and they're going to make it work. They're battling it out day by day, and frankly, my hat's off to them. I chose not to go that way myself. I moved to Washington, but I think those people, including members of my own family, who have stayed there and fought this thing out, they deserve credit for what they've done, and they ought to be able to live there in peace and in some, they ought to be able to get some satisfaction out of their life like everybody else.
Sure.
And
one of the things that I find fascinating about SNCC is just the sheer violence and threats and intimidation that organizers faced. I mean, I don't know what stands out for you, but in reading your bio, getting a dog shot and killed at your footstep, a police officer beating up SNCC workers on the office porch, the Jimmy Travis in Greenwood. I mean, what stands out to you as kind of the most ferocious act of intimidation while you were organizing?
Well, first of all, terrorism is the purpose of terrorism is to put fear in the minds of the larger community.
Yeah.
In other words, we did this to Emmett Till. We'll do this to you.
Yeah.
If you don't get up out of here and don't leave us alone, let us do this thing the way we want to do it. So that's the first thing. And so many of us who had seen that, as I did, most of the people will tell you the first thought they ever had to do anything movement had to do with that picture of Emmett Till. At about the same time I did, because we're all in the same age range. We're all within 4 or 5 years of each other in terms of our age group. So, and many of us, now the people from the North had seen this. I don't think Stokely Carmichael, I had never heard him say he saw Emmett Till. I never heard Colin Cox on these other people. But the people who grew up in the South all saw this. And the purpose, I'm sure that the people who perpetrated that crime were probably satisfied when they found out that the picture was being circulated, because they thought that was going to scare the hell out of everybody.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That is just a misnomer that the world lives with all the time. That if you mutilate somebody, scare everybody else, that's not what usually happens. What you do is motivate somebody to say, "Look, we're going to make sure this never happens again."
Yeah.
And we got to do whatever we have to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's I think the first thing. But secondly, these individual acts of violence. I mean, we all faced it at one time or another in some lonely jailhouse. I was just back in Indianola and 2 weeks ago, and I went to one place where there was a jail, which actually was about 12 feet. Had full bunk beds in there. And, so it doesn't take long to fill up a jail like that.
Yeah.
You get about 20 people, and they pack us in there too, like sardines in those jails. And, and then they would let these people come in and look at you at night, figure they were the head of the Ku Klux Klan or whatever it is, come through the jail cells, just looking. And they weren't going to do anything to you in front of all these other people. Very rarely did that happen. But and even when they beat you up, when people like Gia and others were beaten up, they pull you out of the jail cell, took you somewhere else. They bring your ass back bloody and bleeding, and well, he was sitting in the back of the truck and he handcuffed and he fell around while the truck was moving. Well, that's not true. Everybody knows that wasn't true. So there was some of that, but the most scary moments were the times when for me, was when I got stopped by myself. There was a certain amount of security, a lot of confidence, a lot of bravado that we had when we were together, and this is what got me to Mississippi in the first place. It kept me there for all those years. The SNCC staff of about 30 or 40, 50 people, we had made a commitment to each other that if one of us got arrested or shot, as Jimmy Travis did in Holly Springs, in Greenwood, the others of us would leave where we were and come to see about it. And if they put him in jail, we'd end up in jail together. We're not going to leave him in jail by himself. And we weren't going to leave town until we got him out. And we had to keep bringing people in there. In Greenwood, we brought in Dick Gregory and Al Hibbler, the singer, and all of these people who came to town. We flooded Greenwood with a bunch of people from outside of Greenwood, including the SNCC staff. It was only about 25 or 30 of us. And so we just, and that was the message to everybody else that, you're better off leaving us alone. Let us do this, because if you don't, we'll involve the whole town in this, and then we boycott the city, tell people not to shop anymore, wear old clothes, and so we brought these little towns to a standstill.
Yeah,
and that got everybody's attention.
So there was safety in numbers, basically, is what you're saying. But when
there was safety as well as psychological inspiration, and having people that you knew around you who were not going to leave you. They were going to run if somebody, they saw somebody with a gun, if the place got bombed or something like that. So it was dangerous work, but it was. And when I look back at it, quite honestly, I'm surprised so few of us got killed. Quite honestly, if you told me when I was coming up as a kid in Newland, Georgia, that black people and white people would be able to go to school together, white men would die and go to hell before they let black kids and white kids sit next to each other. Black boys and white girls sit next to each other in a classroom. The schools in the South now have been integrated for 60 years. And some of them are more integrated than schools in the North.
Yeah.
The colleges, and Ole Miss has more black students than Tougaloo College.
Yeah.
They have 4 times the number of students as Plus College, who I spoke when I was down there. And up in the Mississippi Delta State was all white when I left. Delta State now is 75% black. So so it's been a fundamental change.
Yeah.
And these people now who graduate from Delta State, blacks, are more likely to stay in Mississippi. And so it's made a big difference in the country. Now the discussion went on during the Civil War. They're writing the 13th and 14th, particularly the 15th Amendment. Mm-hmm. These states were saying they didn't want to live under black rule. What does black rule mean? They mean if you let all these blacks in this county race vote, right. They outnumber whites 3-1.
Yeah, there's trouble.
White people got to live under these black people. I'm sure that they thought that they had mistreated these people for so long that if they ever got the power of the badge and the gun and the courts, that they were going to take out revenge on these people. And that some of that reverberates through the war. First, Lincoln didn't want to arm these slaves and put them in the Union Army because he was scared. One time he said they wouldn't make good soldiers because they were going to be too busy trying to get revenge on the owners who had mistreated them so much.
Yeah. And
I would say that would have probably been a natural reaction for most people. But there's no history of black people in these sheriff departments that I know of, or the police departments in Mississippi and other places, of them black people actively organizing to seek revenge on white people who that they think might have treated them bad. Matter of fact, sometimes I think they're too meek and humble. They should be more aggressive, and they probably get more done. But that's why they put old people like me in out the pastures so we can so we can sit on the shade tree and think about our past. We're not in charge anymore.
So, in my organizing, the biggest public intimidation is a Facebook post that an official posted, saying this is the most divisive figure in our community right now. Pay no attention to him. And listening to you right now describe that you traveled in packs to ensure your safety, but it really wasn't all that bad. It's just kind of bizarre to me, honestly, that to fear police during the day and the Klan during the night. Dr. Smith, that's pretty crazy.
It is pretty crazy. Well, let me just say this to you. This is something that I think that I would like for white people and black people, white people to know and for black people to remember.
Okay.
I was born in Newnan, Georgia in 1942. It was rigidly segregated. I walked to school every day. White kids rode to school on a bus. The road I walked on had no sidewalk, so I walked on the sidewalk on the road till I saw a car coming. Then you had to hit the ditch so you didn't get run over by a car. Traveling along that road every day was a school bus that had white kids on it, and these kids were going to school on a bus that was provided by the county. I was walking to school with no bus. They were taking my dad's tax money like they were taking everybody else's tax money. If I bought something in the store, I paid sales tax. He worked, so he took his payroll tax. So we were paying full taxation.
Yeah.
But getting no services out of it. So and also the other part of it, especially with a black boy, is you're being taught, this is the Emmett Till story. If you see white people, don't look at them because they'll accuse you of all kind of bullshit. If you meet them on the sidewalk, let them have the sidewalk. They don't want you to bump into them. If you do, they're going to say, all kind of stuff. So this is part of teaching a black boy how to survive. So it's and all of that, I endured all of that as a kid. And I'll give an example. One example. So I was about 16 years old. I was driving by then, a borrowed car, and I told the guy that I borrowed the car from, I was going to put some gasoline in it before I brought it back. So about 8 o'clock that night, I'm at the service station. In those days, you had to go inside and pay first, come back and pump the gas. So I go outside and give a man my little $5, which is probably a day and a half worked in the fields. So I get some gas, fill this guy's car. So about halfway through the pump, some white kids pull up behind me and say, I want that pump. I need to put some gas in my car. So I said, well, I just paid for my gas. I'm halfway through. Give me a minute. I'll be finished. And he started, well, if I tell you to move, then they jumped out of the car. And I said, you know what? I'll be finished in a minute. So I'm trying to talk my way out of this.
Yeah.
And I eventually do talk my way out of it. They don't bother me. So I get in the car. I'm headed home. Before I get home, somebody called my dad and told him that I sassed some white boys, and they were coming after me. So I don't even know this. I pull up in the yard. My dad is sitting in the front with a shotgun, and he's pissed off at me because he thinks I went out there and stirred all this up, and he thought he had taught me better than that. How to survive and get away, stuff like this. Now he was going to defend me. Now, don't get me wrong. He was not going to let these people. I was not going to be no Emmett Till. He wasn't going to let people pull me out of the house.
No. Yeah.
But he was pissed off at me because I brought trouble on the family. Now, he was pissed off about that for a long time, several days too. And so my point is that your life was so tenuous. It was so you live with this threat of fear and intimidation and stuff every day. So when I went to Mississippi, it wasn't new to me to have to face this kind of craziness. But by then, we had made up our minds that the only way to ever stop this was we had to face it ourselves. And then in the summer of '64, we brought all these young white people down there so they could see the same violence we had seen. And of course, it worked like I don't know what, like a bad movie. Before we even got there, they killed Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. We were still in session in Ohio during the orientation. They stopped Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, and they lynched Goodman and Cheney first, by the way. And the sheriff who killed Cheney finally, because Cheney's the only black one, the sheriff says, y'all done killed white ones already. All you left me was this N-word to kill. And that's when he shot Cheney. So, and that brought the whole lives of the nation, because I think Swarner's family owned some New York City newspaper.
Wow.
And so now the world has seen this violence being perpetrated on white kids.
Yeah.
And that's when
Change
the nation starts. That's when the nation starts to change.
Yeah.
And
wake up.
So, yep. So that was now. Now I will tell you this. You have some of my stuff there, but I wrote my mother a letter when I left. When I left Greenwood, I think it was. I went there in February. I left in, I think, February, a year later, because they reassigned me to the first congressional district, which was in Columbus, Mississippi, and that's where I was. By the way, when President Kennedy was assassinated. But I wrote my mom a letter, which she saved too, by the way. And I told her in the letter I didn't think I would get out of their lives, because Greenwood was the most violent place that I ever worked in. They did all kinds of shit there. They bombed the office. They shot up our cars. They dragged some kid down the street. They called me one Saturday. The police department now called me one Saturday morning. They had mentioned some guy that they dragged this guy behind a truck, and they called the office and said they wanted somebody to come out there because this was one of our people who had been killed. Now I quickly took a little. Now I was in charge, by the way, because Guy was in jail. He was the one who was supposed to be in charge. They locked him up already, and that's when he was in Winona. That's when they locked him up. And he went to get Miss Heyman them out of jail in Winona, and they locked him up. They left me in charge of the office. By the way, I was the one that eventually went to get Miss Heyman them out of jail, which was a horrible scene to see them come out of there. They've been beaten and mutilated and stuff. But anyway, so I get out to this truck where they dragged his body behind it. And this was a gravel road, so you couldn't hardly recognize him anyway. And the dude had one arm. Now, this was not somebody we knew. It was not somebody, and I couldn't recognize him anyway. But what was that all about? It was about them trying to show us this violence so they would scare us away, make us leave the town and all this stuff. And then, but they didn't realize that at that point, we knew we couldn't leave because the local people, we would leave them to face this danger all by themselves. At least we had outside contacts. We had press contacts. We had other people, students. We had money. We could get money if we needed to. And so at that point we couldn't leave. But it was. So I wrote her a letter saying I was glad to get out of there because I didn't think I would get out of there alive. And she saved that one. She had been other letters. She saved that one. So I don't know where it is now. I've got to find it again. But she saved it for me.
That notion of not leaving them high and dry, that seemed to cling to you. Yeah. There's a little write up about you thinking about going back from Mississippi your senior year to Morehouse, and you get this newspaper clipping and somebody writes a note to you. This is what happens when you leave us, right?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it was Bob who called me up, said that Moses, because they had some guy that was somebody that we had talked to and who had tried to register to vote. And they killed this guy and dropped it. They found his dismembered body in a river. They put him in a sack, in a croaker sack, which has one of those things that you bought cotton seeds in. It was cotton seed sack that had holes in it. So I guess they put him in there so his body would sink. But they fished his body out and took a long time for them to identify who it was. But they eventually put in the paper that this was somebody who had been part of the civil rights movement over there. It was not someplace where I'd been, so I wasn't personally involved in trying to get this man involved.
Yeah.
But it was enough to convince me that we couldn't lead these people.
But Bob Moses challenges you. He calls you and tells you this is what.
Yeah, and he challenged himself all the time too.
Yeah.
No, he lived with this. He lived with it himself. And he by then, an organizer is somebody who's a judge of personality. You have to be able to connect with the people that you're trying to influence to go do something. Mm-hmm. That's how you get them to do it. And I think he thought he could convince me to come back, and he did, by the way. Yeah. So I did come back. He came back too. He came back. Yeah. And actually, let me just close the story about Bob because in '63, in the fall, when he starts talking about this summer project that takes place in the summer of '64, he brought this to a staff meeting. We voted it down, quite honestly. I was one of the people that voted it down. This
was his voter registration proposal? You guys voted it down?
This was the proposal to do the summer project.
Okay.
Where we would invite our SNCC, white SNCC allies, white campus groups to come. We have SNCC, to his credit, and this is something that people lose about that. SNCC people lose this too at some point. We always had a group of white kids that supported us. We were active. This generation of black students who college campus activists, we also attracted the attention of white college campus activists too. Mm. And we saw those as our allies. They raised money for us. We all helped. So at SNCC staff, people who were assigned to go to certain campuses. Mm. I was assigned to a Carleton College in Minnesota, I believe it was.
Wow.
And so I went there 2 or 3 times. When I get out, you stay in jail for 10 days. You get out, you want to send you somewhere. It's part of so now you go talk to people on this campus. You just got out of jail. You go, little hero on the campus. Yeah, that's right. We face these people. We need your help. But at that point, we weren't trying to bring them down there. At that point, we were not bringing them to Mississippi.
I gotcha.
Because we knew that was going to we knew that would be like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Mm-hmm. You bring some white people, especially white women down there, you see these white guys are going to go crazy. So when Bob started talking about bringing these people down for the summer of '64, we voted this stuff down. We said, look, man, we face enough danger already. It's not, first of all, not going to do any good. Secondly, we face enough danger already. Why don't we invite more danger on ourselves? But that's when Bob said, this is what convinced me. He said, look, see people killing us one by one. They killed Medgar Evers. They shot President Kennedy in the fall. Every time some civil rights advocate got killed, we always thought, it's a numbers game. They come after them in the morning. They come after us at night. So it scared us all. But it's the first time I ever thought Bob was personally afraid because I thought about myself as a SNCC worker in Mississippi. I was probably, if they had a list that they were working off of, I was probably number 50 on that list. I was not,
Yeah.
I may have been higher than that, but I told myself that I probably was low down on the list. But Bob was probably number 1.
Yeah. And
he finally just said to us, look, we won't be here next year. They're going to kill us all off. And nobody gives a shit about us being killed. Mm. So they don't care about black people getting killed. So basically what he said was, let's bring some of these white people down here and let's use them. They're going to lock them up too. They're going to put them in jail. They're going to do the same thing as them they do to us. But and then, as I said earlier, the worst thing you could ever imagine happened. They killed Swan and Goodman and Cheney, and we couldn't have scripted it any better. She was writing a bad movie or a bad play, and 2 blacks and 1 white, and that's on that same point. SNCC and that we told a lot of our people that if they had to come and help us, basically what we said to them, these college kids on these college campuses. And it was a summer program for them. So they came down during the school break. School is out in the summer. So all these kids came down because they were out for the summer breaks. Mm-hmm. And instead of them going to the beach and other places, they came to Mississippi with us. And they had a lot of information about what we were doing because we were going back and forth to these campuses, reporting to them. And we had a group called the Freedom Singers that was singing on these campuses, concerts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then individuals like myself who would go to some campus and talk to them. And we had, so it was we were a real organization, and we found our allies in this thing. And that's what you have to do. When you're 20% of the population in the country, 20% can't rule 80% in a democratic society.
Right.
That's not a democracy. If you're only 20%, you got to find some way. You got to reach across the aisle in order for you to become a majority. That's the only way you can become a majority.
Yeah.
Unless you think you can kill off all of your opposition, which is what happens in these third world countries. They think they can kill off their opposition, and once they do that, the opposition is dead. So they can't ever form a majority against the people who are in power.
Yeah.
And
when I was a kid, I can distinctly remember sitting in middle school, watching what must have been the Birmingham bus boycott,
right.
And seeing just black and white footage of dogs being unleashed on African Americans and everything. And my conception of the civil rights movement, until I really began to study it, I think is not uncommon for a lot of people. It's just like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. rides in on a horse, ringing a bell, and thousands of people, just flood the streets. And then all of a sudden there's a changing of consciousness in the country. But when I read your field notes and when I read Bob Moses's field notes and just the whole infrastructure of SNCC and its voter registration drive, I mean, this is a Swiss clock. I mean, it's organized. You're writing field reports with specific numbers. You're organizing mass meetings. You're getting block captains. You're doing intensive canvassing. You're submitting budgets. You have mock elections. I mean, this is very well organized, and I think that's lost on people. This concept of, I mean, I don't want to take anything away from significant figures like Martin Luther King Jr., but I want to give credit where it's due. And SNCC is pretty intense in terms of organization. I mean, in terms of planning and execution and rehearsals. And I mean, it's strong grassroots organizing. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and let me say, we talk a lot about Bob Moses. I do talk a lot about him. I was obviously very personally committed to him, but Jim Foreman was probably the mastermind behind the overall plan. And Jim was actually an interesting guy. He was actually born in Mississippi. He was born in Holly Springs, north part of the county. Went to Chicago as a kid with his parents, and so he would come back in the summers as a kid. So he was like many of us from the South. We were visited by our relatives who went away to the North and came back and told us how great they were doing and how poorly we were doing with, going barefoot. And I used to wonder, why did my relatives come back down here if we can live with such poor, ignorant people? Why do they want to spend time coming down here to visit us? Then I went to Chicago. I'd never seen that many poor people in any place in my life, so I went up there. They didn't even have peach orchard where they could eat peaches and plums and strawberries and stuff. They had they lived in this concrete jungle, man. I said, how can anybody ever grow up like this? So then I realized why the parents were sending them back down in the summer, because they wanted them to get a little culture, a little bit of acculturation as kids. But I wanted to mention Foreman because I remember sitting down with him in Atlanta with a map, and we were talking about places where we were going to sign people in Mississippi. And that's how I ended up in Marshall County. It was a combination of things. You look for places where there was a majority Black population, and there was a college located there, so there were some kids on these campuses that had already done some demonstrating. And so there was and then we had a list of NAACP people who had been involved in other demonstrations there in those counties too. So we were doing what good organizers do. You go in and you work with the people with the structures already there.
Yeah.
And you bring to them the information you have and others, and so you try to make something out of it. And that's what that's what I think made SNCC great. And also I make the point too that we had, as I said, we had an organic relationship with the white community, with young white people in our generation, who were more open-minded. We knew they were more open-minded than their parents. They had more of a commitment, and so we knew that all at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your one field report. How often were you a field secretary or a field director?
Well, we were called field secretaries. Yes, we were.
That's what I thought. Okay, so
and by the way, let me mention one other thing about foreman. It was foreman that required everybody to send these reports in.
Okay.
And I probably did more than most people because I had plenty of time to do them. And a lot of them are repetitive because not much happens there. What I hope I communicated in that was the bravery of these people that we were working with. And I mentioned one name that you see occurring there a lot. This man named Mr. Piggies, who was he owned his own farm. He grew cotton and he also raised pigs.
Yeah.
And Memphis was only about 40 miles from Holly Springs, Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
And Memphis had a stockyard where you could sell animals. And Mr. Piggies would look at the local newspapers, see what the price of pork bellies were and he would take a load of pigs to Memphis and sell them. He was a farmer. He borrowed money from the bank to plant with. He had to pay the bank back. He had to figure out how much fertilizer he needed, plus all this stuff. He was a businessman, but they would not let Mr. Piggies, and he was also a veteran, military veteran. But they would not let Mr. Piggies register to vote. And he was determined that he was going to vote.
Yeah. And
I mentioned him because when I started working with, he lived about 12 miles outside of Holly Springs. And we'd go to his church, met some people there, started a little program where we were teaching people how to pass the literacy test.
Okay. So
you start out with 20 people, and then 20 become 19, and 18, and 15. It gets down to where it's just me and Mr. Piggies after about 6 weeks of this. And I remember thinking to myself, if Mr. Piggies stopped coming, I wouldn't even have to come down here. Because I got to drive back off some road by myself at night from down there. He had to go back to his farm. I had to go back, but he was not going to stop. It took him forever. Then he finally, they never let him register. He got registered to vote when the federal government sent federal registrars in there. And in 1965, when the 65 Voting Rights Act. About 2 months ago, even in January, I did a Martin Luther King speech in a little town outside of Chicago called Broughton, Illinois, just about 10 miles outside of Chicago. In that meeting, when I talked about my experience in Mississippi, was one of Mr. Piggy's granddaughter. So when I finished talking, she's an adult now. She's in her 50s. So I finished talking. She came to me. She said, Mr. Smith, you remember a man named Joseph Piggies? I said, yeah. She said, that's my uncle. I said, oh. She said, I remember us coming out there. To those meetings. She said they brought her out there as a kid. And I said, man, she lived in Chicago, outside of Chicago.
Yeah.
Family members still live on the farm. She said they still farmers, people were still farming. One of her uncles still farming the land. Mr. Piggy is the one I knew has passed away. But these stories don't ever die. They don't ever die. They don't ever die. The people, and you never know when you're doing something that other people are going to take seriously. But this lady remember my name, and from back there, and she raised her hand and say, "Look, you helped my family. We always thought, what happened to you?" So I said, "Well, congratulations."
Yeah.
It's a nice story about Mr. Piggy's, but I tell you what, boy, there were times when I was thinking to myself, if Mr. Piggy gave up, I would, but he wouldn't let me give up, and I guess I had to. As long as he was there, I had to go.
Mr. Piggy's wouldn't give up, so I couldn't give up. It's the heart and soul of a great organizer. I want to thank Frank Smith for giving us the time. Encourage anybody who's listening to go to learn more about SNCC at the Digital SNCC Gateway. That's sncccdigital.org. It has all the history of the people behind that voter registration drive and their evolution from demonstrating at lunch counters to really building power down in the South. You can also go to Frank's African American Civil War Museum and see for yourself the second part of his life, which is also just as heroic as the first. Now, thanks to everybody who's listening to this podcast. There's more to say, but that's all for now.